just can't afford anymore to be so politically correct.
Action and reaction. Calls for visa restrictions and travel bans hit home in South Florida.
Our work now is to be vigilant on the people who's coming in now.
Historic election results mean Venezuela may be on the brink of change, and as a result, South Florida may be too.
Rain in his last breath said, "It's only a BB gun."
Officer indicted. A Broward sheriff deputy is charged as a criminal in the fatal shooting of a young man with an unloaded air rifle. Good morning and welcome. Michael is off today. What a big week of news, and we begin with one of South Florida's community-shaping issues, immigration. The U.S. immigration process is now under scrutiny and in some cases under fire as details emerge of how a suburban couple in San Bernardino was able to unleash mass murder in the name of jihad. Late this week, lawmakers moved to change the immigration and visitor processes in several ways, to make it tougher to travel to the U.S. from allied countries, for workers to find employment here, for couples to stay together geographically. The biggest headlines went to GOP frontrunner Donald Trump, who called for a plan to ban Muslims from entering the country.
For a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
We begin there with our panel. Linda Osberg-Braun is a South Florida immigration attorney. She's been counsel for the U.S. Immigration Service and also a federal public defender. Nizar Hamzeh is the executive director of the Florida's Council on American Islamic Relations, which advocates for Muslim civil rights. He's also a Broward sheriff's deputy. Josh Bratter is an immigration attorney with a background in international law and also a law professor. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to start right there with what everyone's talking about, this Donald Trump ban all Muslims from the country temporarily statement. Universally panned, really. But let's talk about whether, Linda, is it even constitutional? Is it even legal?
Absolutely not. However, we need to take the elements of what he is stirring up, and we have to take what, if anything, is valid. And the only point that is valid is the vetting, the intelligence, and the background that the United States must conduct in and outside of the United States. And that's the only point of validity relating to his statements.
So saying all of those things, is there a chance, Josh, that you could ban a class of people?
It's interesting, and it's somewhat ironic to know that in the beginning of our law course this year, we began speaking about a doctrine of law that's called the plenary powers doctrine, which invests the Congress with the unfettered discretion to make determinations as it relates to immigration. These are cases that were emanating from the 1800s, and today we see the very language that was used in these cases being discussed and justifying and legitimizing this policy, and that is the plenary power doctrine and the ability to exclude a class of individuals as it was done in the 1800s with the Chinese individuals.
Nizar, I know we put you in a position to speak for an entire community of people, but you do have many tentacles in the Muslim community. You are very involved and you are an advocate, and what is the reaction to this?
Well, the Muslim community doesn't like it. The American Muslim community doesn't deserve this. I can tell you that on the ground, the reaction that we're getting, typically during a terrorist event internationally or domestically, the American Muslim community faces the backlash. Now we have to fear something else. When Donald Trump goes on national TV and says that he's going to ban all Muslims, we also get the immediate backlash. There have been cases in Florida, throughout the entire country as a matter of fact, but specifically in Florida, where mosques are vandalized, Muslim homes are shot at, people are getting death threats. This is happening because of the rhetoric that Donald Trump is saying on national TV.
And despite an almost universal panning of his words, you hear cheers in the background when he says it. We found ABC Network old footage of then President Jimmy Carter, a Democrat in the White House in April of 1980, who was in the midst of an Iran hostage crisis. And he went on television to make an announcement about his moves toward Iran. Listen to this footage from 1980.
and a virtual shutting off of all Iranian immigration into this country by refusing new visas to Iranian citizens. Moreover, the president warned these 4 steps may be just the beginning.
All of the steps I have ordered today are those that are necessary now.
So he was cutting ties with Iran and banning an entire nation's people. Many Iranians at the time did not support the Ayatollah, were afraid of political persecution, yet they were among those who were about to be banned into the United States. What's the difference here?
You know, I'm not really sure there is a difference, and the reality is that the United States government has a tradition in times of conflict of using immigration law as an instrument for political ends. This is no different than the Korematsu trials and the Japanese internment. This is no different than Haitian interdiction, special registration for Muslims subsequent to 2001. I think the use of heavy-handed immigration policy as a political end is something that has been used historically and traditionally in times of conflict.
Linda?
Immigration law has been broken for a long time. I've been telling my clients for the last 16 years that something's going to change, and I say it really is going to now. It needs to change now, and it needs to be workable for the United States. It needs to be a priority in our country, because the way our country is about national security and the economy. And immigration, of course, it's interweaved, but immigration and the good people who deserve to be here and the good people who help our economy need a way to immigrate and serve the country. It's time to fix this broken system.
You know, with the headlines now, though, when you talk about it's time for the good people to be able to come in and bad people to stay out, I can't help but look at the headlines of the couple in San Bernardino, and prior to their unleashing mass murder, they were considered good people. They were a suburban couple, they had friends, they had co-workers, they had a baby. I mean, what are the ramifications now of this particular incident with this couple vis-a-vis weeding out good people from bad?
I think it's important, being a member of the law enforcement community, that we have to stick to our values as a country: freedom and security. And that means we need to focus on criminal behavior, not on one's religion or what they believe in. And to put a ban on all Muslims is targeting a religion and targeting the followers of one particular religion. It's a waste of resources, and it doesn't make us any more safe. It makes us less safe.
You know, the House on Tuesday voted to start the tightening of the visa waiver, and I'm sure our audience knows what the visa waiver system is. Just in general, friendly countries, if you're there, whether as a traveler or an immigrant, you get to come here without a visa. So what the House did on Tuesday, Josh, was to decide that people who are coming from certain countries, Syria, Iran, Iraq, a couple more, can't come without a visa even from friendly countries. Is that the start of something bigger?
It could be, and the reality is this, that is the concern. The concern is that in a spasm of xenophobia, the country begins to implement policies that are misguided in their implementation, as opposed to directing these efforts towards security considerations. They start to have far-reaching misguided implications in employment, family, and, as Linda suggested, some other the well-meaning, purposeful immigration concepts.
But when you look at what happened in Paris, I mean, first of all, European citizens were the ones plotting terror, and those are the places from where people come without visas. What is wrong with addressing, now as a reaction, what's wrong with addressing a problem where there are people in countries that do not need visas to come here, and making sure that that is not a loophole?
We have to step up the enforcement aspect of the visas, though. When you fill out the form to get a visa, the question is are you a terrorist? Have you engaged in terrorism? Nobody is going to say yes.
Has anyone ever?
How do we, not that I know of, how do we realistically find and gather the intelligence both inside and outside of the country? Because this couple in San Bernardino, they showed signs of being terrorists. How do we, and maybe from a law enforcement standpoint, how is the United States going to vet this? I think the visa system has to step up in the enforcement aspect, because those few people are ruining it for the rest of the country.
I think it's important to put it into context. If we're talking about people getting visas, that means they're living abroad. and that's going to be a question for the experts of the people that live abroad. I can definitely speak to what the American Muslim community and law enforcement is doing here to deal with these types of issues. So we have built a coalition institutionally for many, many years, since 2011 in South Florida, and many other communities throughout the country that are dealing with these types of behaviors that you're saying there's little indicators and signs of radicalization. And the community, every single time they see these types of issues, they work amongst themselves in the community, and they have a relationship with law enforcement, and they report it. And that's how they're dealt. Most of the convictions that you are getting, that you're seeing of these plans of radicalization or terrorist activity, they come from tips from the American Muslim community, because the American Muslim community knows that terrorists don't care who they kill. They'll kill Muslims first because they don't think that they're Muslim, right?
The immigration attorney you have on the CARE staff.
Sure.
What's been the difference in the last, real quickly before we go to break, what's the difference in the last couple of weeks trying to obtain visas or entrance for people?
It's a very cumbersome process, the immigration process to start with. So now all of this extra scrutiny, obviously it's putting the brakes on everything. It's becoming very difficult for the immigration attorney that we have on staff to do his job.
All right, so there are, what I want to talk about is the different cases and levels of visas. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break, and we're really going to take a deep dive into what visas are available and to whom. Stay with us. We are back. We're going to pick up where we left off, talking about different varieties of visas, how people get from one place to another. And one of the biggest headlines coming out of San Bernardino is that Tashreem Malik was on a what people will call a fiancé visa, and I know there's a more technical term, K1.
The K1.
K1 visa, and apparently went through background checks and fingerprinting and interviews. Who missed what? Where was that loophole?
That had to be done at the embassy. And again, she filled out the same form that asked, are you planning to engage in terrorism? So the investigation had to be abroad, because the fiancé visa is a way for a fiancé to come into the United States, because you can't come as a tourist. You're an intending immigrant. So it's a way to bring a couple together so they can process inside the United States. All of the visas are founded on good intentions, but again, she filled out no to all of those questions, and the State Department abroad did not fully investigate.
And so, was there a loophole, or did someone drop the ball, or both?
I think it's the level of intelligence, and again, the level of the investigation at the embassy, because there are so many people applying for visas, and perhaps most of them should be approved, and they all help the economy of the United States. But it's finding that needle in the haystack and making sure our intelligence is state of the art.
Nizar, we were talking earlier about the importance of social media now, and apparently Tashreem Malik had social media postings, maybe not under her name as she goes by, but social media postings talking about being radicalized and her affinity for jihad, that were completely either ignored or missed by immigration authorities.
I think it's extremely important that the American people know that the American Muslim community is 100% loyal and dedicated to this country.
I guess my question is, does it concern you that American authorities, U.S. authorities, blew it?
Well, let me explain. The reason why I wanted to open with that is because it's important to understand that we have to be shoulder to shoulder. It is, I don't want to say impossible, but nearly impossible for the government to catch every single thing. So what has to happen is there has to be a shoulder to shoulder coalition. If these types of behaviors start to come up, the community, as they have in the past, need to come up, and they need to work with law enforcement and say, hey, I was on my friend's Facebook and I saw this really weird post. It was very anti-American, even supporting ISIS or whatever the particular post says, and that needs to be reported to law enforcement. And that's the relationship that we have, right? So that partnership needs to be strong. And when we start alienating and we start isolating the American Muslim community as part of the problem is only going to get worse. As a matter of fact, when we do that, the terrorists are winning, because that's their ideology. Their ideology is Muslims are not part of America, and we don't want them to be part of America. So when we feed into that rhetoric, it becomes a problem, and it disencourages participation with law enforcement. And when we have our elected officials, our presidential candidates, spewing the same hate, all that's doing is dividing our country and making us weaker. So we need to have that relationship to catch these things that are being done on Facebook.
Understood. And you would hope that law enforcement, while relying on people to report those things, would also have a component within the department to be looking for that themselves.
Absolutely.
Josh, your specialty is employment visas. Is that right?
That's
and
correct.
I think Florida Senator Bill Nelson is one of the two senators who is broaching this bill to drastically cut down the ability to get an employment type visa to come. But I don't think that's in response to what's been going on in terrorism fears. I think that's more of a employment protection kind of idea. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there is considerations with respect to labor shortages, with respect to with wages, with respect to maintaining competitiveness within the market, and there's just been within particularly the H-1B classification, there's been something of a misuse of the classification, and there's been incidents of fraud that have been identified with people outsourcing employees that had been intended to be working with their traditional employer.
So while this has an economic goal, certainly in the times we are now, there's got to be some security component concerned.
I mean, I would say that the real issue is that there's just been a far-reaching fallout from this heavy-handed implication and use of immigration laws for security purposes. What's happened is, as resources have been drawn from some of the more employment-based categories towards security, and while focus has been drawn there's been a depletion of resources for the administration and adjudication of cases in the employment-based categories. This has made things slower, this has made things more protracted, and it's added a degree of mystery to the process, as we can no longer effectively counsel our clients as to what is taking so long. And the specter of terrorism and the specter of security is what kind of shades and informs their notion of what's delaying their cases. And so, yeah, the interplay between the security considerations and the adjudication of employment-based visas has kind of meshed right now.
And I have to say that the delay is not caused by security. The delay is the refusal to fix the system that's broken. When there are only 65,000 H-1Bs a year and more than 200,000 apply, we're practicing law with a roll of the dice. And the H-1B, Congress needs to give more H-1Bs because they're good for the economy. They help employment in the United States. Same with all the other employment-based categories, including the L, which is virtually not existent anymore.
What is the L?
The L is where you transfer a person to the United States from a well-founded company in another country to create jobs. And it does create jobs, but the enforcement of it, the adjudication of it, is that they're denying all but the biggest companies. And our country is founded on mom and pop growing the economy and hiring people. So the H-1B, the Ls, it's all about the economy. And the slowness is the inability to fix the problem, not security.
And is the slowness a component of tightening security?
Not at all. And each visa, we pay a $500 anti-fraud fee, and we hire investigators to go investigate whether that person is working. Let's do the same thing with background across the board, every nationality, and it pays for itself.
You know, I want to just real quick go back to the visa waiver issue. Might this have an effect on tourism? I mean, if visa waiver countries, tourism to the United States is significant. I can't come up with a number, but if we're cracking down on visa waivers, is that going to be a tourism issue?
Well, I'd like to weigh in on the Muslim community.
Sure.
The people come to this country, the American Muslims that have immigrated here, they come to this country for the freedom. Now, if we're talking about limiting the amount of Muslims that are coming in because they are in fact Muslim, that's a huge problem. My father was an immigrant. My father immigrated from Lebanon because he wanted to get away from all the war between, the Civil War. So he came here. So is that going to be a problem? Absolutely. Some of the most genius, Steve Jobs, all these people are children of immigrants, and they are contributing to the fabric of our society. Look, we're iPads, iPads here. This is something that's real, that's on the ground. So to target just Muslims is a huge problem. I absolutely agree that there needs to be intense security overview. We need to do thorough background checks, but just to target Muslims, we're failing. We're failing. The terrorists are winning.
Nizar Hamzi, Linda Osberg-Braun, Josh Spratter, thank you so much for coming in. Important discussion. We're going to keep it going. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And up next, a police officer indicted, a socialist government upended, a sports franchise scores public money. It is an eclectic plate for the round table. Get ready to weigh in. No shortage of news this week for the Roundtable, and we have an all-star cast today. Katie Fang is an attorney, former prosecutor, now in private practice, and a broadcast legal analyst. H.T. Smith is a veteran Miami attorney and a law professor at Florida International University. Political journalist Mark Caputo covers Florida for Politico, the go-to website for political junkies like us. And Marlon Hill is a Miami-based attorney and a talk show host, radio show host, tackling all kinds of community issues, just like we do here. Yes. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Okay. Let's start out this morning with late in the week, this indictment of Broward Sheriff's officer for manslaughter. Huge on so many levels, but an indictment is very different, H.C. Smith, from a charge outright, and it was 2 years in the making. What are the ramifications of a grand jury indictment in this case?
Well, first of all, like you said, it's been about 30 years since we've seen a police officer indicted in South Florida for shooting anyone. And the last time was William Lozano, the case that precipitated a riot down in Miami, and he was convicted and later acquitted. You know, we always say no one is above the law, not even our police officers. We give them a tremendous amount of authority, respect, and discretion. But what comes with that is accountability. And I think the indictment says to law enforcement and it says to the community that anybody who violates the law will be held accountable. I read in the paper yesterday that Roy Black said there's no chance that this person will be convicted. But I think the fact that he was charged is a step in the right direction. We don't know what the outcome will be, but he should be brought to be held accountable.
But is this necessarily a product of the post-Freddie Gray indictments and the fact that one of the 6 officers that was responsible for Freddie Gray's death, allegedly, is now on trial? They've presented their case and they're going to basically get it to a jury this week and we'll have a verdict. I
think it's a product of the fact that everything that's being done now is being seen by the people. The police said that the person would not drop his gun when he was ordered to do so. And he said he didn't have anything in his ears. Well, when he fell, someone took a photograph of him with earbuds in his ears.
We have that video.
And the earbuds wound up later in his pocket.
So what's worse than here? Is it maybe a mistake in the heat of the moment, or was this a cover-up, it seems? Well,
that's the environment that we're also in terms of the timing that some of these indictments and charges are coming along too. I think that something's really happening in America where we're really taking a very close look at the clash between civil rights and law enforcement environment. And the transparency that the social media has afforded us has now opened up the legal system to a part of America that has not been really paying attention. Yep. So I think the timing here as well with this BSO arrest, HD, is also an issue in regards to why did it take so long?
2 years. 2 years, July 2013. But to respond to Katie, we just had an officer convicted of raping 8 black women out in Oklahoma. We're seeing things and hearing things that we've never seen or heard before. And when I say see, I mean there are videos of a lot of things that's going on. Katie has a good point, though. Does what's going on in the nation, is that helping prosecutors and community to actually push for more charges? I don't know.
Well, it's a good question. I think we should also look in Miami-Dade. We've had a lot of officer-involved incidents where people have died. In fact, the most recent one was at Art Basel, what, 2 weeks ago?
Miami Beach. Well, it actually wasn't at Art Basel.
Pardon me. Yeah, there was just a mere. There was a mere stabbing at Art Basel. Okay. Yeah, the officers, officers surrounded a man who was obviously, he just got out of prison, out of his mind, had a barber shop blade, straight edge razor that he had stolen. But if you watch the reporting of Jim DeFede in Channel 4 and of Tim Elfrink in Miami New Times, they have exposed how the officers appeared not to have followed protocol, in doing this, from the tasing of the guy to the other officer who then shot him as he was being tased.
Well, this was all on video, and anyone
Right.
who watches the video sees that the taser and the gunshot fired
Almost simultaneous.
Almost simultaneous.
Right.
Which begs the question: two different officers, did they have two different reactions?
Well,
or not?
It appears that the taser went off first, and under what's known as, I never heard this before, sympathetic gunfire, if a person has a gun drawn on someone and then hears a loud noise, he's going to press the trigger. And what's supposed to happen is that when you have a taser and you're going to deploy it as an officer in a situation like this, you're supposed to yell out taser. Everyone hears taser, and then they know someone's going to tase. That never happened. The guy who shot him with a taser shot him, and then the officer, hearing a noise, then shot him dead.
Well, in the interest of fairness, I will tell you what has gone unreported for now. They're looking into what this man said prior to about having a bomb, and I think that was probably
when he went to go rob the bank.
He was shirtless.
A bomb can be planted in many places.
Oh, so shoot him dead? Oh, we're going to shoot you dead in case you planted a bomb
Well,
somewhere.
I'm just saying, as the media reports the story and takes the deep dive, I think it's really important to look at every side of the story.
But why have we not had any indictments of any of the officer-involved shooting here? One of the officers who did the tasing.
Well, you know, we have a civilian investigative panel here in the city of Miami that is supposed to be vetting some of these police officer involved shootings. And it's really the environment of civil rights. We really need to have an environment where folks are able to see that, that you can indict a police officer. As HD said, no one is above the law. And I think that the environment now is opening up and balancing out the powers.
And I have to say, as a former prosecutor who's dealt with very serious cases, it takes some time. It takes some time to be able to do a thorough investigation, so you do explore every side of what happens, including what was said that you couldn't hear with everybody's, iPhone or whatever they were using. And once that process happens, then you eventually end up presenting to a grand jury, or you don't. I mean, but for example, look at the heat that Rahm Emanuel is getting in Chicago for what happened to Laquan McDonald. How long did it take for them when it looked very obvious that he was gunned down, 16 times in the street? And so it just takes some time. So I want everybody, including the viewers who are watching, to understand there's no rush to judgment either way, and there really shouldn't be, especially when it involves law enforcement, because they are armed and they are charged with the responsibility of protecting the community. But it should take some time.
But sometimes it takes too long. The Memorial Day shooting on Miami Beach was a great example. Speaking of evidence, there are reports that police went around and got people's cell phones and erased the video from the Memorial Day shooting. This stuff becomes a little more difficult.
Some of that was actually on video, an officer asking to take
and it's
somebody's
multiple jurisdictions, hundreds of witnesses, videos. I mean, that's the point. It takes some time to be able to investigate.
And one of the officers who did the shooting in that case was the officer who tased the guy, leading to his death 2 weeks ago.
You say that as if that's an indictment of something. So what?
They are not following. They are obviously. Miami Beach has cases of cops who are juiced up on steroids, driving around on beaches, hitting people. You have a case of mass shooting on Memorial Day weekend.
Doesn't
you
like
have
the
this
beach
guy.
police.
Well, clearly there are time and time. Yeah, there are history and history and history of all this stuff. It's just coincidental that none of them ever did anything wrong.
But is it a crime or is it a civil lawsuit?
Well,
That's not exactly true.
Here comes the funding of body cameras, right? So we're not going to
which is in use in this particular case on Miami Beach. Can we turn just quickly to a monumental story in Venezuela that is no doubt going to be impacting South Florida for the first time in a lifetime, someone's lifetime, 17 years. Voters have said, moved away from, I guess is a better way to put it, socialism.
That's right.
And what do you think the impact on South Florida is going to be? Venezuelans that populate Weston and Doral largely are here because they are escaping that?
Yeah, but right now, Venezuela really is in really bad shape. We've got inflation of 159%. 18% of people are unemployed. We've got a situation, however, where the oil, which was $100 to $125 a barrel, which gave them the power to be a force in South America, is now down to $40 a barrel. We have the people, the countries moving away from the Chavismos, in Brazil.
Because of economics, not because of politics.
Well, in Argentina, the new leader is talking about human rights violations.
Well, we're going to see exactly how the president deals with this supermajority in the legislature. This is a bigger issue beyond Venezuela, including for the Caribbean as well, because Venezuela has this super sweet deal with the Caribbean for oil, selling cheap oil for financing. So it's going to impact Cuba, it's going to impact Trinidad and Tobago, It's going to impact, the price of oil is falling. And even with the conflict in the Middle East, sometimes you think that the price of oil is going to increase where there is more conflict. But Venezuela is suffering from falling oil prices.
But are we going to get more Venezuelans coming to Miami, especially now that you have more? Now you're not a socialist
Or those who are here,
are they going to go back? No, I don't know about that. Tens of thousands of homicides, tens of thousands of kidnappings, $50 billion lent to Venezuela from China.
That's not going to change the political environment in Venezuela.
Are they necessarily going to stay here? It's the same idea. Now that Cuba's opening its doors, are the Cubans going to go back to Cuba that are here?
I think that's a different issue, though.
True. No, I agree, but it kind of stirs the same.
But we're going to see some serious conflict. Right, with a supermajority, they can now appoint and take people off the Supreme Court. We just saw the people who lost the election promote the judge who sentenced 14 years, Leopoldo Lopez. And now I'm sure the first thing that's going to happen, watch and see, within the next month, the new government's going to come in and give amnesty. And Lopez is going to announce for the president when the time comes up. So and then they're going to try to take the president Maduro out.
The new government doesn't start until January 7th, so a lot can happen.
Well, I think another problem that's gone unaddressed is that it's not that the voters really said no to socialism.
Right.
They said no to what the socialism had brought. Helena Palaio, a Venezuelan journalist from here, she had told me, she says, people are saying, look, I have to wait in line for 4 hours to buy chicken. I can't get toilet paper. You can't get certain feminine products.
Right.
This is not a way to build a country.
The definition of all politics is local.
Right.
It's playing out right there. Stay with us. We'll be right back. They could
The field of Republicans out there is so messed up, I figured it makes you miss me, doesn't it? Yeah. And that's saying a lot. Cruz and Rubio. Rubio and Cruz. Sounds like a Miami law firm. If you've been injured on the job, call Rubio and Cruz.
Love Will Ferrell as George W. Bush, making politics fun again. But
Donald Trump's been making politics fun for a while.
Well, let's talk about Cruz and Trump. Cruz in Iowa now zooming ahead. What happened there?
Well, I think people are now starting to really engage and look at the records. And in the end, if you're a very conservative person, you care about conservative issues, Trump is probably not your guy because he's been on all sides of the issues. He hasn't been a consistent conservative. If you like consistent conservatism with an evangelical Tea Party bent, Ted Cruz is your guy, and Cruz has positioned himself to be Trump's successor, and it's starting to work, apparently, in Iowa.
In Iowa.
You know, Cruz and Trump are in this very delicate cha-cha-cha dance with each other. They're not really, dancing with each other.
That's a mental image I'm not sure I wanted to have this morning.
There's an alliance.
Wait, politics makes strange bedfellows.
Well, there's a big bed that they're laying out between each other, but they're in this type of alliance. Very interesting to watch.
Well, we talked in the last couple of segments. We started out with, the ban all Muslims, Trump's big headline this week, HT, and you heard people cheer in the background. Yeah. What does that tell you about his candidacy and where it's going?
Anytime there's fear in the nation like this, you're going to have demagogues who step forward and take advantage of it. I'm very hopeful the American people, and a majority of the American people, will reject that. Once you begin, people look for things that are simple and fast in terms of resolving issues. But you start thinking, well, what about Muslim Americans who are outside the country? They can't come in? Well, I don't like that. What about Muslims who are coming to this country to go to the funeral of a Muslim relative who was killed fighting for America? Well, I don't like that. What happens when Muhammad Ali goes outside the country? He can't get back? Maybe that's not such a good idea. And then we begin to remember what our founding principles are all
Any
about.
bad news for Trump is good news. Right? This is what he's doing. Right? He is using those environments to steal the microphone, to steal the stage, and that's what it's all about for him in terms of publicity.
But more importantly, too, he's losing his stature in the international community, which, if you think about it, if you're the commander-in-chief, you're the president of the United States, and Netanyahu's like, yeah, no. And he's like, well, I'm not going to go now. I mean, what?
He got to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu and Muslims.
When does that happen?
That's tough to do.
Hello?
That's awesome.
That says it all.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think he's very comfortable there, though.
Right. And, well,
But
He
are
is.
we?
And let's not do what a lot of the Republican elite, both in the consultant political world and in the media establishment, have done. They've said, Donald Trump doesn't represent our values. We don't know why all these Republicans have gone to him. Not true. Donald Trump did the birther thing for a while. No one really in the GOP establishment denounced him. This is a monster they helped create. And for a while, there was a subtle amount of Muslim bashing that was allowed in the GOP by the elites, by the establishment. And Trump has harnessed that. And, you know, I hope it's not too inappropriate, but, you know, in a kind of a racial political sense, Muslim is the new black, as far as it's okay to be prejudiced now against Muslims. That is where a lot of our culture and society is going right now.
Well, it's interesting that as we get closer to the caucuses and the primaries, it's now that the party is starting to really put in place a machine to try to
the Reince
turn
Priebus
the tide.
thing.
Yeah,
Are
but-
they actually planning it?
Yeah,
Exactly.
but let's also remember that Iowa has not been a very good indicator of who the Republican nominee will be. Winning Iowa has not been very positive in you becoming the nominee. So I think things are really going to heat up when we move to New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, and Florida.
I think things will really heat up when we go to the convention, which I think is going to be a brokered one.
Ooh,
if you
you
ask
do?
me. Yeah, absolutely.
They're saying it's going to be that way.
Yeah.
So I want to use New Hampshire as a, watch this segue, kind of a cold and icy place. Let's go to ice hockey, which brings us back to Broward. Anybody
Very
a
skillful.
Panther fan here?
Well done.
We've never gone.
I haven't
so
seen
we-
any rats lately, but...
Well, the team that you've never seen just got an $86 million tourist tax infusion in Broward County.
And I'm
You're
thankful,
just aching.
I am
to
thankful
go.
I don't live in Broward County. You fools. You put, you know, $86 million more into an art, bringing the amount of tax money to like $324 million. And now they say, oh, well, we had to give the money because we would have lost money in the end. And that's based on our consultant studies. I'll bet if you went back in time and you saw the original financing deal for the stadium, they would have had consultants who would have said, oh, this is going to pay for itself. And now you're going to hear the same thing over and over again. They shoveled more money into a bad deal.
But isn't that the problem? The original agreement put this agreement in a very bad
the deal has changed quite a bit. But if the Panthers don't start throwing more rats into the rink, we're going to have a problem. They won't start winning soon.
Have they done that lately?
They haven't really done that lately. It's really started very slow.
It was a 5-3 vote, so it's not like it was like, you know, neck to neck. I mean, it was a 5-3 vote in the Broward County Commission, and commissioners like Lamarca said no. And you're right, Mark's right. The number is huge, and they're now saying to justify the deal that there's an irrevocable letter of credit that will protect the county in the event that the things go south. But I gotta be honest with you, I don't see that being the case in terms of really protecting the county, and I don't really know who really vetted this deal at the beginning, as Glenna says, and then who vetted it now, because I'm not sure that I'm buying the numbers.
But according to the studies of the staff in Broward, it would have been an economic wash either way, but then wouldn't the county have been on the hook if something had gone wrong? What if the owners declared bankruptcy and null and voided everything?
And that's why the letter of credit is so important, because that supersedes bankruptcy. There's still $140 million owed for the original construction, not only of the arena itself, but the ramps leading into it. So now if the Panthers are not there, that's the anchor tenant. I don't know if there are enough concerts to be able to pay the debt service.
I think the location HD of that arena was set up for failure in the very beginning.
It's not palatable.
And unfortunately, they're just trying to save the asset that they have right now from a business standpoint.
Is ice hockey a viable long-term sport here?
You know, not in my opinion, but, you know, who am I? I only grew up in South Florida.
Well,
I've never been to a hockey game.
Excuse me, Mark. One thing we know, the only
I guess.
sports that's viable in Miami are winning teams. That's not something that
And
Panthers are doing.
we definitely need to congratulate our South Florida high schools for a winning sweep, and your Pop Warner teams are sweeping the football championships.
Yeah, Mike
from all the
Cherry
top.
Park won 2
Had I
championships.
known we would have gotten video, we could have done a whole discussion on that.
I'd pay to go to that.
All right, all right.
All right, thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
You're awesome. We love you.
We love you.
All right, up next, long past deadline, Governor Rick Scott and the Seminole Tribe sign off on a gambling compact, but it's still far from a done deal. That's next. This week, Governor Rick Scott finally signed a new gambling compact with the Seminole Tribe. The last one had exclusivity provisions that expired last summer. The new deal expands gaming in some ways in the state, and it limits it in others. There is some winning and some losing. As always, in a grand compromise, this is that gaming compact Governor Rick Scott signed with the Seminole tribe Monday night.
There are absolutely expansions of gaming in this deal. There's no doubt about it. But there's also retractions of existing licenses.
The deal would extend the current compact 20 years, increase the tribe's revenue sharing guarantee, $3 billion to the state in the first 7 years, and it adds exclusive games. What you don't see here are Vegas-style games like roulette and craps. This compact would, for the first time, give the tribe the option to add those games too.
Obviously, it creates certainty for the tribe for the next 20 years. But equally important is that we've just saved 3,500 jobs.
The Seminoles also agreed to accept possible future gaming licenses to resort facilities in Miami-Dade and Palm Beach only, and limits licenses to pari-mutuels in other parts of the state.
We certainly prefer to have, more of a monopoly if possible, but puts a real limit on gambling. Everybody knows where they stand for the next 20 years.
At least one pari-mutuel is against, on the losing end, says Magic City Casino's vice president. I look forward to working with the legislature on ensuring we truly level the playing field, he writes.
I think it'll be a tight vote. This is not going to pass with overwhelming numbers. I don't think we'll ever get to a place where we'll have 100% agreement on this legislation.
And it is a long way from a done deal. All involved expect the compact will be amended several times before the State House and Senate agree to put it to a vote. And when we come back, the flushes are counted, public toilets win an extension, an idea whose time has come. And that's next. A beautiful live look now from the Miami Tower Cam. Here's Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with a Sunday forecast.
All right, South Florida, we've been dealing with some showers that are passing through the area, and temperatures are in the 70s across the area, except Marathon, 81 degrees. So it's very warm, and we've been dealing with those showers, as I mentioned, also breezy conditions. Maximum winds right now at 20 miles per hour out of the east. Showers continue to push off of that east wind, and they're spotty. But the good news is they're quick movers, so we're not expecting prolonged rainfall. Key West had another round of showers. And up into Broward County, you could see bigger showers are pushing towards the west over Pembroke Pines, Miramar as we speak. Weston, you'll probably get a little bit of rainfall in the next few minutes. Now, this is all due to that high pressure system situated over the western Atlantic. And remember, guys, that there's a high rip current risk still in effect. So please keep that in mind. Also, small craft advisory will also remain in effect through this evening. Temperatures staying above the average as we start off the new week.
Sounds good, Jennifer. Thanks. It's one of those only in South Florida stories. A basic human function becomes the basis for a political standoff. And that's basically what happened earlier this year in a fight over funding public portable toilets on downtown Miami streets, because a significant number of homeless people sleeping on the streets were also using those streets as bathrooms. To make a long story short, last spring, the Downtown Development Authority actually mapped and counted feces, which led to the city funding portable test bathrooms. And late this week, they documented a dramatic drop in public human waste. They counted some 2,000 flushes at the 2 pit stop stations like this. Okay, so the counts may not have been strictly scientific, but suffice to say, those are very well used. So here is the question. Why aren't public bathrooms a staple in every downtown as a general public service? What may be a homeless-centric issue in Miami is really a public health issue for any city that hopes to draw people in and out of their cars. Any place that wants to promote a walkable, enjoyable atmosphere. Inside places like malls and theaters have bathrooms, and promoters of outdoor special events, they're mandated to provide facilities, so public bathrooms could have a positive economic benefit too. Ask any downtown business where they post those customer-only signs on their bathrooms. People who need to go and can't have to leave. So, to solve Miami issues, the city decided to fund another $500,000 to continue the downtown porta-potty service another 6 months. In the long term, putting in permanent stations might cost less if it's put out to bid, and in the annual budget juggle of spending priorities for public health and urban planning and an economic boost, it could be a win-win all the way around. What do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like. Email, Facebook, Twitter. You can reach us at any of these addresses. We are very easy to find, and we'd love to hear what you think. Take care. Have a beautiful Sunday.